My name is Toby, and I love the smell of bleach. Strange confession, isn't it? Most people wrinkle their noses when it burns in the air. But for me, it's a lullaby. Bleach doesn't lie. It doesn't perfume over mistakes. It erases them. It gives me silence. Too bad tonight didn't smell of bleach. The 27th floor apartment greeted me with the chill of an overworked air conditioner and the faint sweetness of expensive liquor. White carpet, white walls, white silence. A place so polished it almost denied anyone had ever lived here at all. And yet the news channels had been buzzing for hours. A powerful alpha, the owner of this place, had simply vanished. I crouched on the carpet, gloved fingers pressing a cotton swab into its fibers. The sound was soft, like paper tearing in the distance. Something was wrong. The fibers carried no trace of blood, no trace of life, but too many traces of absence. Whoever had cleaned before me hadn't erased. They'd patched, and a patch always leaves a seam. The swab caught it, a thin medicinal tang, like mint masking something dirtier beneath. Cheap, rushed, sloppy. "Do you always work before dawn?" A voice asked behind me. I didn't flinch. People pay me not to flinch. "Flexible schedule," I said evenly, still bent over the carpet. "And you are?" "Insurance agent." His tone was smooth, practiced, with a glint of humor. "That's the mask." "The real job?" "Clan detective. Name's Syl." I rose and turned. A man in his late 30s, tall, sharp-shouldered, suit pressed with surgical precision. His tie was perfect, yet strangely soulless, like it had been tied by someone else. His eyes didn't study me, they studied the space around me, as though he were mapping silences between my words. "Not police then," I said. "Thankfully for you. No paperwork, no interrogation rooms, just us." He strolled toward the window, scanning the room like a man checking wine for clarity. His presence disturbed nothing, yet I felt the air bend toward him anyway. "Too clean," he murmured. "Don't you feel it?" I pressed another swab along the baseboard. Mint again, faint and wrong. "Someone tried to erase," I said. "But they erased backward, layering old trace over new. Something they teach in second-rate workshops. And you're a graduate of the good ones?" His lips curved almost politely. "Self-taught." I dropped the swab into a vial. "Clients don't pay for diplomas." He nodded, as if cataloging truth. Then he stepped closer, inside my space, where most men knew not to go. And there it was. His scent, not aggressive like most alphas, not sharp or dominant. It was like tea left to cool, patient, persistent, almost quiet. My lungs betrayed me, drawing it in before my mind told them not to. "If I said I wanted your scent," he asked softly, "would that sound professional?" I snorted. "It would sound stupid." "But honest." "Honest works," he said, mouth tilting at the corner. "A high-ranking alpha disappears. His family files for death benefits. The insurance is ready to pay out millions. But the traces here don't match. Too neat, too deliberate, almost like someone wanted you to see them." "You think I was meant to find this?" I said. "I think you're already in it," he countered. His voice was calm, but his gaze sharpened like glass. "And I think you've been in it before, a long time ago, an old case, ugly one." I lifted my eyes slowly. "You're building castles out of guesswork. I'm building them out of echoes." His tone didn't waver. "Do you know what that is? When someone pulls you out of the hunt, and what remains is not a name or a face, but a thread, a pattern. You can walk through a city, and suddenly the air hums with it, like a tune you almost remember." My jaw tightened. I looked away, pretending to study the glass door to the balcony. My heart was too loud. "Poetic for an insurance man," I muttered. "We have excellent rhetoric courses," he said smoothly. "And coffee. An ungodly amount of coffee." Syl let the silence stretch, then added, almost lazily, "Here's my offer. You show me the seam. I tell you where it leads. And then we meet, by chance, at a cafe. I'll order tea. You, nothing. You're always nothing. And in that nothing, we'll put the name of whoever really erased this place. And in return, I stop asking about your paperwork," he said with a small shrug, as though it were trivial. "Fair deal." We watched each other, weighing truths against risks. He was too precise, too calm. but refusal wasn't an option I could afford twice. Fine, I said at last. But next time, drop the theatrics. No theatrics, he agreed lightly. 1 hour. The 43rd Cup Cafe. It happens to be on your way home. I narrowed my eyes. And how would you know where I live? He smiled, the kind that wasn't really a smile. We do have very good courses, he said again. And memory. See you soon, Toby. He left, carrying his quiet tea scent with him, and the room felt emptier for it. No blood. No violence. Just seams stitched where life had been. I checked the windows, sealed my samples, and for once allowed myself a dangerous indulgence. I slid open the balcony door and breathed in the night. Then, like a thief leaving a calling card, I left a sliver of myself behind, mint, bitten clean with lemon, not a trail, a choice. If someone was watching, they'd know. I wasn't running. I was deciding where to walk. The hallway outside my apartment always smelled faintly of instant noodles and old paint. After the silence of the 27th floor, it was almost comforting. Here, life was loud, cheap, and ordinary. Exactly what I needed. I slipped my key into the lock as quietly as I could. No such luck. The door swung open before I could turn it, and a blur of messy hair and oversized t-shirt leaned out. "You're late," Ellie said, squinting at me over her glasses. She was 21, a student who lived on instant coffee and exam deadlines. Beta, bright-eyed, still convinced the world could be negotiated with good grades and decent people. She wasn't mine to protect, but she was mine to share rent with, and that made her my problem. "Time is relative," I said, stepping past her into the cramped apartment. "Yeah, well, my stomach isn't," she shot back, following me toward the kitchenette. "There's leftover rice. You should eat before it goes solid." Ellie's version of scolding always landed halfway between genuine worry and roommate nagging. She thought I worked for a cleaning company, nothing glamorous, but stable enough to cover my half of the bills. I didn't correct her. She didn't need to know that I erased more than dirt. The apartment was nothing special, 2 small bedrooms, a living space that doubled as kitchen and laundry, furniture scavenged from sales and curbside rescues. The walls hummed with the neighbor's TV. A world away from luxury carpets and vanished alphas. And yet, as I dropped my gloves into the sink, a heavy silence settled in my chest. Normalcy was supposed to be a disguise. Lately, it felt like a luxury I didn't deserve. "Eat," Ellie insisted, plopping a bowl in front of me before I could protest. "You look like someone wrung you out." "I always look like that," I said dryly. But the rice was warm, and my stomach didn't argue. A knock rattled the door. Ellie froze. "Relax," I muttered, rising. "It's the landlord." I opened the door to find Mr. Rowe, our building's unofficial warden. 60-something, posture still sharp despite his paunch, eyes like steel under drooping lids. His constant companion, a shaggy mutt named Pudding, trotted in ahead of him and went straight for my shoes. The dog shoved its nose against my ankle, snuffling with desperate determination. "Not tonight," I said, trying to sidestep. Pudding growled softly, tail wagging like he'd found a puzzle piece he couldn't quite place. Mr. Rowe's voice was gravel dragged across wood. "He doesn't do that with anyone else. He likes bleach," I replied without missing a beat. The old man narrowed his eyes, but didn't press. That was his way. He noticed everything, asked nothing, and let silence do the work of suspicion. "Rent's due next week," he said flatly. Then, with a curt nod, he tugged Pudding back toward the hall. The door shut. Ellie gave me a look. "Seriously, Toby, even the dog thinks you're weird." "I am weird." I finished the rice. "It's part of my charm." She rolled her eyes and turned on the TV, flicking through static until the news settled in. A polished anchor spoke of pending death certification and substantial insurance compensation for the family of the missing alpha. The words slid into the room like knives disguised as paper. Ellie barely listened, already distracted by some meme on her phone. But I felt the weight of it, heavy as bleach in my lungs. Compensation meant closure. Closure meant the case would be sealed, and my presence at the scene tonight hadn't been an accident. Somewhere out there, Syl was connecting threads. And somewhere closer, someone else had been trying to stitch their mess with my methods. I rinsed the bowl, shut off the sink, and told myself this was just another job. But when Pudding's growl echoed faintly through the hallway again, I couldn't shake the thought that maybe my seams weren't as invisible as I liked to believe. The cafe called itself the 43rd Cup, a pretentious name for a place that smelled of burnt espresso and cinnamon syrup, but at least it was open all night. The kind of spot where students, insomniacs, and people with secrets blended into background noise. I slid into a booth tucked against the wall, my back to the corner. From here I could see the door, the counter, and every reflection in the greasy glass panels. Old habit, old paranoia. Sil arrived exactly on time. Not early, never early, but not a second late. He carried himself like a man who never waited, only arrived. Coat over one arm, tie loosened just enough to look deliberate, not careless. He ordered tea, of course. He struck me as the type who enjoyed irony. "You look like someone who didn't sleep," he said as he sat. "I look like this even when I do," I replied, stirring sugar into water I had no intention of drinking. His smile was small, almost courteous. Then it vanished, replaced by that sharp-eyed stillness I'd come to expect. "Do you know how much a dead alpha is worth?" he asked. "Depends," I said. "In dinner conversation or in insurance paperwork?" "In numbers," he replied smoothly. "Millions. Whole clans lean on the policy payouts. Status, security, inheritance. When an alpha dies, money flows like blood, and blood always follows money. But this case..." He tapped the table, once, twice. "This case is too perfect. No mess, no trace. Except yours." I bristled before I could stop myself. "Not mine. Not yours," he agreed calmly. "But close. Someone's been borrowing your style, and doing it badly." I forced myself to lean back, arms folded, like his words meant less than they did. But the truth pressed cold against my ribs. I'd seen the seams in that room, the awkward stitching of traces, the cheap mint cover-up. It was almost a parody of my work. "They want you to notice," Sil said quietly. "To follow the trail, or to take the blame, or both," I muttered. He tilted his head, studying me. "Do you recognize the hand?" I hesitated, just long enough for him to notice. The air between us tightened, the clink of cups and hiss of milk frothers receding into a hum. "It looked familiar," I admitted. My voice came out rougher than I wanted, like someone trying to mirror my cuts. But mirrors lie. They flip everything backward. Sil's gaze sharpened. "So you do have an enemy who knows your methods." Enemy's a strong word. "Let's call him an ex-colleague with poor impulse control." I tried to smirk, but it felt thin. "And where is this colleague now?" "If I knew," I said, "I'd be on a beach instead of babysitting your tea." For the first time, his expression cracked, a short, dry laugh, quickly smothered. Then he leaned forward, elbows on the table, voice low enough to draw me closer despite myself. "You understand what this means, Toby. If it is an imitation, then someone's staging an alpha's death, not just to vanish, but to cash in. A staged death is harder to prove than a real one. The payout would buy them protection, new life, freedom." "Freedom's expensive," I said. "But death is cheap if you know how to scrub it clean." Our eyes met across the table. For a moment, there was no cafe, no noise, just the sharp, unspoken knowledge that whoever was behind this had learned from me, either directly or from the traces I'd left behind over the years. Sil broke the silence first. "You're a key, Toby. Someone built this lock in your shape." "I'm not a key," I said sharply. "I'm a cleaner. That's all." He didn't flinch. "Keys don't get to choose what doors they open." I pushed back from the table, more forcefully than I meant. A couple of students glanced over, then looked away just as fast. I lowered my voice. "I didn't ask to be dragged into this, and yet here you are," Sil said evenly, sipping his tea as though the conversation hadn't just split my chest open. "Your choice is simple. Help me find who's using your name, or wait until the clans decide they'd rather blame you. And you know they will." My hands itched for bleach, for the certainty of erasure. But bleach couldn't fix this. Not without burning me away, too. Sil set down his cup with delicate finality. "So, Toby, what will it be? Do we trace the seams together, or do I start looking at you as the culprit?" The question hung heavy between us. And for the first time in years, I wasn't sure which role fit me better. The law offices looked like a temple that had forgotten it was supposed to serve people, not worship money. Glass walls, leather chairs, the faint hum of air filtration systems expensive enough to erase even the smell of human doubt. Syl walked in like he owned the place, though technically it was the clan's territory. I trailed him, trying to look like I belonged. I didn't. The receptionist's smile faltered when she glanced at my ID, as though she could smell the forgery under the laminate. We were escorted upstairs. A conference room waited, lined with heavy books no one read, their spines a decorative lie. Syl chose the seat at the head of the table without hesitation. I leaned against the wall instead, hands in my pockets, pretending to admire the skyline. That's when she entered. Liv. She moved like polished glass, sharp, fragile-looking, but if you leaned wrong, she'd cut. Her suit was immaculate, hair swept back in a style that screamed efficiency. The only thing warmer than the office lighting was the way her eyes softened when they landed on Syl. "I heard you were back," she said, voice low even. "Of course, you wouldn't come home to the clan. You'd come here." Syl didn't rise. He never rose unless he had to. "Liv." His tone was cordial, distant. "I didn't expect you to still be here. I don't leave things unfinished." Her gaze flicked toward me, assessing. "And who is this?" "Consultant," Syl said before I could open my mouth. "Consultant," she repeated, tasting the word like it was over-seasoned. "An Omega without a clan, traveling on borrowed papers? That's not a consultant. That's a liability." I smiled politely. Funny, I was about to say the same about lawyers. Her lips curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. "You're bold. That can be mistaken for relevance. Or for being correct," I countered. The air in the room thinned. Syl's jaw twitched, but he said nothing. He was letting us spar. Or maybe he wanted to see who would draw blood first. "You're playing dangerous games," Liv said finally, focusing back on him. "The clan needs you, Syl. You owe them. Every hour you spend outside, you weaken our house." "I don't owe them my life," he answered, calm but steady. "Yes, you do. We all do. You above anyone. You were given rank, trust, protection. And now—" Her eyes slid to me again. "Now you risk all of it on shadows, who clean carpets for a living." I raised an eyebrow. "Better carpets than coffins." For a second, I thought she'd actually laugh. But instead, she straightened, her professionalism snapping back into place. "You've changed," she said to Syl. "I suppose I shouldn't be surprised. But you'll come back. You always do." She left with the same sharp grace she'd entered, her heels clicking like punctuation. The room felt colder once she was gone. Syl exhaled slowly, as if he'd been holding that breath since she walked in. He didn't look at me. She means control," I said. "Same thing, in her world." I studied him for a moment, the way his fingers tapped against the table, measured, almost restless. The faint shadow in his eyes when her name had first crossed his lips. He wasn't shaken, not exactly, but he wasn't steady either. And me? I wasn't sure what shook me more, the realization that he still mattered to her, or that she saw me as enough of a threat to try cutting me down. Liv wasn't a villain. She was something sharper, something more useful. A pivot point. She could block us or clear the way, and she wouldn't hesitate to choose whichever served her survival. Not an enemy. Not an ally, just another seam waiting to be pulled. The basement of our building always smelled like damp concrete and forgotten laundry. A place where tenants stored broken chairs and boxes of old textbooks they couldn't quite throw away. I came down there for quiet, sometimes, when the walls of my apartment felt too thin. Tonight, I wasn't alone. Mr. Rowe was already there, standing stiffly beside the storage cages, arms folded behind his back like a retired soldier. At his feet, putting paste in circles, whining low in his throat. The dog's hackles were up, tail stiff, nose darting from one shadow to another. "Evening," I said, my voice echoing against the pipes. Mr. Rowe gave me the barest nod. He never wasted words. Then his eyes shifted toward a corner, where a cardboard box sat just outside the cages. "Too clean. Too deliberate. Someone left that last night," he said. His voice carried the finality of a court verdict. I approached slowly, the soles of my shoes crunching against grit. The box wasn't dusty, no water stains. It had been placed, not dropped. I crouched, peeled back the flaps. Inside lay a jacket. Expensive leather, clan insignia stitched on the lining. And spotless. Too spotless. No trace of sweat, of wear, of human life. It was polished to sterility, the missing alpha's jacket. I didn't need to check twice. My gut knew before my eyes confirmed it. "This doesn't belong here," I said quietly. "Nothing down here belongs," Mr. Rowe replied, his tone unreadable. Then, after a pause, "The dog doesn't like it." As if on cue, Pudding let out a sharp bark and lunged at the box, teeth snapping at the air around it. Then he froze, staring into the corner like he could see something the rest of us couldn't. His growl deepened, low and steady, until it vibrated through the concrete floor. I stepped back, not because of the dog, but because I understood. The box wasn't a gift. It was bait. Someone had scrubbed the jacket the way you'd scrub fingerprints off a gun. Too perfect, like a magician's flourish. A message meant for me. I closed the box, slid it back into the shadows. My hands wanted bleach, fire, anything to burn it out of existence. But burning it would only mean playing along. The basement door creaked open, and Sill's silhouette filled the frame. He descended the steps calmly, his presence flattening the tension in the air, though Pudding's growl didn't stop. He took one look at the box, then at me. "Well," he said softly, "that answers one question." "Which one?" I asked. "Whether they know who you are?" His eyes glinted in the dim light. "They do. And they're not just copying your methods anymore." I glanced at the dog, still frozen, eyes locked on the empty corner. The hairs on my neck rose. Sill stepped closer, voice low, precise. "He's not warning you about the jacket," he said. "He's warning you about the message. And the message is—" My throat felt dry. Sill's smile didn't reach his eyes. "He's playing with you directly now." The trail led us to a building that hadn't mattered to anyone in years. The windows were bricked over, the door half-hinged and groaning, the air inside thick with dust and rust. Abandoned places always carried two kinds of silence, the natural kind, and the kind someone planted there to hide something else. Sill's footsteps echoed evenly on the cracked tiles. Mine didn't. I'd learned to walk without sound. We moved past broken desks, graffiti, the smell of mold. And then, there it was, a seam. On the floor, smeared faintly where sunlight couldn't quite reach. Someone had cleaned. Not thoroughly. Not accidentally. They'd wiped a wide arc across the tiles, then dusted it over to look untouched. To anyone else, it would read like natural decay. To me, it screamed imitation. I crouched, fingertips hovering just above the surface. My lungs filled with the faint sting of solvent, beneath it the bitter edge of cheap mint. My chest tightened. I knew this work. Not the precision, I'd never leave something so clumsy, but the rhythm of it. The way the cloth had dragged, the arcs of pressure, the choice of masking scent. Like handwriting, only uglier. I'd seen it before. "Someone's trying very hard to impress you," Sill said behind me, his voice smooth as if we were discussing wine instead of death. "Not impress," I muttered. "Mock." He stepped closer, watching me without crouching, always letting me kneel in the dirt while he stayed composed above it. "You recognize the hand?" he asked. My jaw worked before the words came out. Once, years ago. He wasn't good then either, but he thought money was faster than practice. Sill tilted his head. "Colleague?" "Partner," I admitted. The word tasted sour. Back when I thought a second pair of hands might make the work lighter. Turns out, greed makes everything heavier. The memory stung sharper than the solvent. Nights of teaching him how to slice seams, how to lift smells out of air like threads from fabric. Nights of him nodding, pretending to listen, already calculating shortcuts. The last job we'd touched together had ended in a fire and a deal gone sour. I thought he'd disappeared. Apparently not. Sill's gaze narrowed, calculating. "Then this isn't random. He's drawing you in on purpose." "That's what worries me," I said. "He knows my eyes. He knows I can't walk past a bad stitch without pulling at it." We stood in the half-light, the walls breathing dust around us. My pulse thudded too fast. Old history clawed its way up, demanding I acknowledge it. Sill broke the quiet first. "Then maybe we stop pretending you're just reacting. Maybe we let him lead us, and we follow the thread to its end." I looked up sharply. "You want me to take the bait?" He spread his hands, calm as ever. "You already have. The question is whether we follow it together, or whether he keeps tugging at you alone. Something in me resisted, the instinct that had kept me alive for years. Never trust, never follow, never let anyone else write the script. And yet Sill's presence steadied the air. He wasn't rushing, wasn't flinching. He was offering partnership, not leash. Dangerous thought, dangerous comfort. If I go along with this, I said carefully, you'll have to keep up. He won't play safe. Sill's mouth curved, almost a smile. Neither do you. I huffed out something like a laugh, shaking my head. First rule of my trade, never trust other hands. They always leave fingerprints. Second rule? He asked. Don't get caught working with someone who smiles like you. He chuckled softly, and the sound was disarming in a place that had forgotten laughter. For the first time since this mess began, I felt something loosen in my chest. Not safety, not trust, not yet, but a crack in the armor, a small allowance that maybe I didn't have to walk every seam alone. We left the building side by side, dust trailing behind us like smoke. The trap was set, the path marked, and for the first time in years, I wasn't the only one holding the thread. Rain in the city always carried its own perfume, metal from the train rails, oil from cracked asphalt, smoke rising from vents that never stopped breathing. Tonight, it was heavier, grayer, as if the whole sky had decided to scrub itself raw. Sill and I moved fast through the streets, following the invisible tug left behind by my old partner's sloppy stitching. Every seam, every fake erasure pulled us deeper into a neighborhood that hadn't been safe in a decade. Empty shops with busted shutters, neon signs flickering on fumes of electricity. Too quiet, I muttered, shoving my hands deeper into my coat pockets. Sill walked a half step ahead, shoulders squared, scanning shadows. Quiet means choice. Either they're waiting, or they want us to think they are. I almost smiled. You ever say anything comforting? No, he answered simply. That was when the sound came. Not thunder, not rain against glass. Footsteps. Too many, too fast, circling. Trap, I hissed. Before he could answer, the first figure lunged out of an alley, mask, hood, the stink of adrenaline layered over damp clothes. Two more followed, one from the street, another from behind. I ducked as the first swing of metal whistled past my head. My body moved on instinct, slide, pivot, strike. But I wasn't built for fighting armies. I was built for silence. They weren't here for silence. They were here for noise. Sill moved like a blade unsheathed. No hesitation. His fist connected with one attacker's jaw. His shoulder slammed another against the brick. Even in the rain, even in chaos, he looked controlled. Too controlled. Then I saw the knife. A glint in the gray. It arced toward me from the side. Down. Sill's voice snapped, and in the next second his body collided with mine, shoving me aside. The knife buried itself not in me but in him, slicing across his side as he twisted. His coat tore, fabric blooming dark against the wet. I froze for half a heartbeat, watching blood blend with rain, the scent sharp and unmistakable. Then I moved. I grabbed the attacker's wrist, yanked hard, slammed him into the pavement with a crunch that ended the fight in one breath. The others scattered at the sight, not loyal enough to bleed for their employer. The street went quiet again, except for the rain. Sill leaned against the wall, breath measured but tight. His hand pressed against his side. Just a scratch, he said, which was exactly what people say when it isn't. I pulled his coat aside before he could stop me. The wound was shallow but angry, a diagonal slash cutting across his ribs. And beneath it, older, whiter, a scar carved long ago. A scar I knew. My stomach dropped. I remembered the night. The alley years back, darker than this one, the chaos of a hunt closing in. An alpha cornered, breath ragged, bleeding out. I had been reckless then, but skilled enough to pull the seams, to erase the trail that marked him for death. He'd stumbled away with that wound. I'd never seen him again. Until now. That scar, I whispered before I could stop myself. Sill's eyes flicked up, sharp despite the pain. You recognize it. I should have lied. I should have shrugged it off, but the words were already clawing out of me. I was there, I said. That night, when you were marked, I pulled you out. For once, his composure cracked. Rain slid down his face, but it couldn't hide the way his eyes widened. the flicker of something raw breaking through his practiced calm. "You," he said slowly, as if the word were a weight. "It was you?" The silence between us felt louder than the storm. My chest burned with the memory of that night, how I'd chosen to erase him instead of finishing the job, how I'd given him freedom when freedom wasn't mine to give. Now here he was, alive, standing in front of me, blood seeping again from almost the same place. "You saved me," he said. Not a question. A statement, flat and unarguable. I looked away, my throat tight. "Don't thank me." It wasn't charity. It was a mistake I keep repeating, but the truth was, my pulse was hammering for another reason entirely. Because for the first time in years, the seam between past and present wasn't clean. It was torn open, raw, bleeding. And Syl was staring at me like I was both the wound and the cure. The safe house wasn't much safer than the street. 4 walls, a dripping sink, and a mattress that smelled of mildew. But it was quiet, and quiet was worth more than locks. Syl sat on the edge of the bed, coat off, shirt half unbuttoned, his side bandaged with strips I'd torn from an old towel. Rain tapped against the window like it was trying to listen in. He didn't speak for a long while. Neither did I. I busied myself with the bandages, the tools, anything to avoid his eyes. Finally, he broke the silence. "I knew it was you." The words landed harder than they should have. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, my voice steadier than my pulse. Syl's smile was faint, bitter. Not the face, not the name, but the echo. I looked up. He was staring past me, into memory. "You can't erase it completely," he continued. "When someone pulls you out of death, it leaves a trace. Not a trail, an echo. It follows you. Quiet, constant. I've been chasing it for years." His eyes slid back to me. Sharp, searching. I thought I was imagining it. In crowded streets, in half-empty bars, I'd catch a flicker. Not a person, a resonance. And every time I wondered if I was walking too close to a ghost, I forced a shrug. "You should have seen someone about that. Hallucinations aren't healthy." He ignored the barb. "Tonight proved it. The scar, the way you looked at it. You know, you were there." My hands tightened around the bandage roll until my knuckles whitened. "What difference does it make? You lived. End of story." "Not end," he said quietly. "Beginning. That night, I should have died. But someone decided I shouldn't, and that decision has been with me every step since." His words scraped something raw inside me. I wanted to tell him it hadn't been about him. It had been about me, about proving I could control what I erased, about keeping one life when I'd destroyed too many others. But the lie wouldn't form. Syl leaned back, his face half in shadow. "Do you know what it's like? To feel gratitude and suspicion at the same time? To wonder if the man who saved you did it out of mercy or calculation?" I swallowed. The room was too small, the air too heavy. "You talk too much for someone with a knife wound," I muttered. He huffed a laugh, low, humorless. "And you avoid too much for someone who carries the truth." The silence that followed, stretched like wire pulled taut. He shifted, wincing, then fixed me with a look I couldn't dodge. "If it was you, I don't need thanks. I don't need apologies. I just need to know why." My throat locked. Every instinct screamed at me to say it, to admit it, to let the echo settle between us, instead of thrumming louder with every beat of his heart. But survival was louder. Confession was risk. So I forced myself to meet his gaze and lie without words, by saying nothing at all. The rain against the glass grew harder, a gray drum beat. Syl watched me for a long time, waiting for an answer I wouldn't give. Finally, he looked away, his jaw tight. "Fine," he said softly. "Keep your silence. But echoes don't fade. Not really." He lay back on the mattress, closing his eyes. Whether from exhaustion or refusal to look at me anymore, I couldn't tell. I sat in the corner, the damp walls pressing close, my chest a storm of truths I refused to release. He was right. Echoes don't fade. They only get louder when you try to ignore them. And tonight, the echo between us roared. The insurance archives didn't smell like bleach. They smelled like paper left too long in metal drawers, dust and iron, and a faint trace of ink. The kind of place where secrets went to suffocate under stamps and signatures. Syl walked ahead with the confidence of someone who could belong anywhere. I trailed, scanning the cabinets, the sterile lighting, the humming fluorescent bulbs. My instincts prickled. This wasn't a space meant for men like me. A clerk escorted us to a private reading room and left with a quick bow of respect, directed at Syl, not me. The table in the center was already stacked with files, each folder stamped with clan seals. Syl flipped one open, scanning. Here, the missing alpha, Davin Thorne. Official cause of death, unverified disappearance under violent circumstances. Convenient. That wording triggers a payout. I slid into a chair, pulled a file closer. The paper was too clean, signatures too neat. Someone had rehearsed this. You're telling me a man vanishes, leaves behind a spotless apartment, and his family cashes a check big enough to buy their own city block? I said. That's the plan, Syl replied. The payout secures the family, and the clan keeps the story tidy. He tapped the page with one finger. But this isn't just about insurance, it's about escape. I frowned. Escape? He was promised into a marriage he didn't want. Binding contract, clan politics, obligations. Death was his only out, or so he thought. Pieces clicked, bitter as bile. So he fakes it, disappears, buys his freedom with blood money that isn't even his. Not just his, Syl corrected. He had help. Look here. He slid another file across the table. Documents of another case, 2 years back. Different clan, same wording, same payout. The seams were obvious now, once I looked. Too clean, too consistent. Not accidents, a pattern. Someone's selling erasures, I muttered. Packages of freedom. Fake your death, vanish, and pay the middleman. Syl's eyes narrowed. And that middleman knows your trade. Before I could answer, the door opened. Liv. She entered without hesitation, heels clicking against the tile, her gaze already fixed on Syl. But when her eyes slid to me, they sharpened. I warned you, she said. The clan bleeds when its members betray it. Davin Thorne didn't just run. He spat on his vows. Nice to see you too, I muttered. Her look could have frozen fire. But she ignored me, addressing Syl. Do you see now? This isn't about protecting an Omega with false papers. This is about traitors dismantling the very foundation you were raised to guard. Syl's expression didn't shift. So you came to help? She straightened her jacket. I came because betrayal rots from the inside. I won't stand for it, not from Davin, not from anyone, even if it means standing next to him. Her chin tilted toward me with disdain. Generous, I said dryly. Does this temporary alliance come with terms and conditions? Liv's eyes glittered. One condition, don't get in my way. The tension between us tightened, like wire. But for once, I didn't feel like she was the enemy. Her anger wasn't aimed at me, it was aimed at the man pulling strings behind both of us. Syl leaned back in his chair, calm as if he'd orchestrated this himself. Then we agree. The real target isn't Davin, it's the broker, the one selling freedom like contraband, and leaving my fingerprints all over it, I muttered. Syl glanced at me, unreadable, which makes you the perfect bait. Liv didn't argue. She didn't even blink. In that moment, I realized something dangerous. She and Syl could play the same game. Cold, calculating, patient, and I was the piece on the board. But still, I saw the edge of something else in her. She wasn't here to drag me down. She was here to cut down the man who dared tarnish her clan. Enemy? No ally. Not exactly. Just another shadow whose direction depended on the light. And for tonight, the light fell on the same target. The dorm always smelled like cheap detergent and ramen. Tonight, though, there was something sharper beneath it. Mint. The kind that stung the nose. The kind my old partner used as cover. Ellie's building was buzzing with late-night noise, laughter, footsteps, music bleeding through thin walls. I slipped inside with the ease of someone who didn't belong, but had perfected the art of pretending he did. She was upstairs in her tiny room at the end of the hall. I was halfway there when I saw it, the door ajar, just enough. A shadow moved inside. I didn't knock. The figure loomed over her desk, hood up, gloved hands rifling through her notes. Ellie sat frozen on the bed, wide-eyed, clutching a pillow like it could shield her. Step away, I said. The intruder turned, startled, and the scent of mint hit me full force. He lunged without hesitation. I met him halfway, shoving him back against the wall. The room was too small for finesse, just elbows and knees and raw instinct. He swung, I ducked. He shoved, I caught his arm and twisted. His mask slipped enough for me to see his eyes, wild, desperate. Before he could recover, the door slammed wider. Out of my building, Mr. Rowe's voice growled, low and absolute. And then there was Pudding. The mutt launched himself into the room with all the grace of a sack of bricks, teeth bared, fur bristling. The attacker swore, jerking back as the dog snapped at his leg. It wasn't a bite that drew blood. It was a warning. But it was enough. The man tore free, bolted past us, disappearing down the hall in a blur. Pudding chased halfway before Mr. Rowe barked a command that froze him in place. The silence afterward was heavy, broken only by Ellie's shaky breathing. She looked at me then. Really looked. At the gloves, the stance, the fact that I hadn't flinched when danger was in the room. You. Her voice cracked, but she steadied it. You're not just cleaning houses. I didn't answer. Words would only tangle the truth. Her eyes softened, even as her hands trembled around the pillow. You take away the awful things so the rest of us don't have to see them. You erase it. I finally met her gaze, expecting fear, expecting disgust. Instead, she whispered, "That doesn't make you a monster, Toby. That makes you the opposite." Something inside me cracked at that. I turned away, focusing on the window where the rain streaked glass, mint still lingering in the air. My old partner had marked this place deliberately, dragging Ellie into the line of fire. But Ellie wasn't shrinking from me. She wasn't pulling away. For the first time in a long time, someone saw what I did, and didn't run. Behind me, Pudding gave a single satisfied bark, as if punctuating the moment. Maybe monsters didn't clean up after everyone else. Maybe monsters left stains behind. And maybe, just maybe, I wasn't one. The room was too clean. That was the point. Sil and I had stripped it bare. No dust, no scent, no shadows out of place. We'd painted the air with false trails, weaving them into the corners like threads of a spider's web. To anyone else, it looked sterile. To someone like me, it was a minefield of lies waiting to be stepped on. "This will work?" Sil asked quietly, his shoulder brushing the wall where he waited in the dark. "He'll think it's perfect," I said. My voice sounded steadier than my heartbeat. "And he won't be able to resist proving he's smarter than me." The silence pressed in. We waited. Rain drummed against the windows. The city's neon bled faintly through the glass, painting us both in colors too bright for the moment. Then, footsteps. Heavy, unhurried. The door creaked open. He stepped inside. Hood pulled low, gloves neat, carrying himself with the swagger of someone who believed the room was already his. The mint-sour cover drifted ahead of him, bitter enough to make my jaw tighten. My old partner. He looked around, scanning, and I saw it, the flicker of satisfaction in his eyes when he spotted the seams I'd planted, the deliberate imperfection. He moved toward it like a moth to flame. "You always thought you were clever," he muttered, his voice muffled through the mask. "But you left this. You wanted me to see." Sil shifted in the shadows, ready to move. I held him back with a glance. "Not yet." The man crouched, reaching to trace the false seam with his glove. His fingers followed the arc, mirroring the mistake he used to make when we worked together. A mirror turned backward. That was the catch. Because in a mirror, everything flips. And he didn't notice. He copied the wrong angle, dragging the solvent in the opposite direction. He thought he was erasing, but instead, he was leaving a stain. A rookie's error. His error. "You never learned," I said aloud, stepping into the light. His head snapped up. His eyes widened, then narrowed into fury. "You set me up." "You set yourself up," I replied. "You've been chasing freedom like it's something you can buy with erasures. But freedom isn't a blank floor. It's the people who'll still stand in the room when the blood's gone." He lunged, knife flashing silver. Sil was there in an instant, blocking, twisting, his fist colliding with the man's wrist. The blade clattered to the floor. The fight was brutal, quick and close, Sil's precision against the other man's desperation. I could have ended it with my gift. One swipe, one clean erasure, and the man would vanish like he'd never existed. My old instincts burned for it. But then I thought of Ellie clutching a pillow in her dorm room. whispering that I wasn't a monster. I thought of Pudding growling at shadows to protect his master. I thought of Mr. Rowe watching silently, but never turning me in, and I realized, if I erased him, I'd just be repeating the cycle. Another disappearance, another ghost no one could mourn. Instead, I reached for the threads. Not around him, but around them. I pulled hard, stripping the seams that connected Ellie, Mr. Rowe, even Syl, out of the web my partner had spun. I burned every trail that pointed their way, the room filled with the sharp sting of bleach and ash. But it wasn't his end I carved, it was their protection. For once, my hands didn't erase a life. They erased danger. The man faltered, gasping as the false field collapsed around him. Syl struck clean, one decisive blow that put him on the floor, groaning but alive. I stood over him, chest heaving. "No more," I said. "You don't get to use my work to sell freedom like a counterfeit bill. You don't get to leave people paying for your escape." His glare burned, but it was weaker now. Syl hauled him up, binding his wrists with practiced ease. His eyes met mine across the wreckage of the room. "You chose them," he said simply. For once, there was no mockery in his tone, only recognition. I nodded, throat tight. "No trace," I whispered. "But not of us. Not this time." The rain outside swelled, washing against the glass like applause, and for the first time in years, the seams I'd woven weren't about hiding. They were about keeping. And I realized I'd never felt cleaner. The first thing I noticed when I opened the door wasn't the sound of Ellie's terrible music or Pudding's nails skittering across the floor. It was the smell, warm, yeasty, alive. Fresh bread. Ellie was at the counter in our cramped kitchen, her sleeves dusted white, hair pinned up with the stubbornness of someone who refused to let failure stop her. The oven hummed, and a tray of imperfect, lopsided rolls sat cooling on the stove. "You're home," she said, grinning without looking up. "Good timing. These are edible." Probably. Pudding was already stationed beneath her, whining and pawing at her ankles, like the world might end if he didn't get a taste. Mr. Rowe leaned in the doorway with his arms crossed, his expression carved in stone. "The hallway smells like a bakery. This isn't a cafeteria." Ellie stuck her tongue out at him. "It's called being neighborly. Neighborly would be cleaning up after yourself," he muttered, though his eyes softened. When she set aside one roll and placed it on a napkin, for him, not for the dog. I watched all of it, leaning against the doorframe, and something inside me shifted. For once, the air didn't hum with bleach or blood, or the faint trace of mint. Just bread, laughter, and the ridiculous clatter of a dog's tail on the floor. Liv arrived not long after, her suitcase in hand, heels sharp even against our cracked tile. She looked like a woman too polished for our building, but she carried herself without apology. "I'll be leaving," she said simply. Her eyes flicked to Syl, then to me. No venom, no disdain, just acknowledgement. For now, our paths don't need to cross. "Good luck," I said, before I could stop myself. She raised an eyebrow, then almost smiled. "You too. Try not to burn down what little home you've built." With that, she left, her figure crisp and steady even as the stairwell swallowed her whole. The silence after her departure wasn't heavy. It was lighter than I expected, like she had taken the last piece of unfinished business with her. I turned back to the kitchen. Ellie was scolding Pudding for stealing half a bun. Mr. Rowe was pretending not to eat his, and for the first time in years, I realized I didn't need someone else's papers to feel like I belonged. I didn't need to hide behind other names. "Something on your mind?" Syl's voice came low, close. I hadn't even heard him step in behind me. I looked at him, shirt rolled at the sleeves, hair damp from rain, the faint scar still visible beneath the edge of his collar. My scar, in a way. I think," I said slowly, "I'm done living as someone else. No more borrowed names, no more erased seams, just me." His smile was small, but it reached his eyes this time. He stepped closer, so close that the warmth of him cut through the kitchen air, bread and rain and all. "If I say I want your scent forever," he murmured, "does that count as unprofessional?" My heart stuttered, and for once, I didn't mask it. I let the warmth rise, let it fill the spaces bleach had never touched. "It's honest," I said, "and I think mine wants yours too." Ellie laughed from across the room, unaware of the shift in the air. Pudding barked, triumphant with his stolen bun. Mr. Rowe sighed as though the building itself had betrayed him by becoming a family. And me? For the first time, I didn't feel like a cleaner waiting for the next mess. I felt like a man standing in his own kitchen, breathing in fresh bread, alive with the possibility of a tomorrow that didn't need to be erased. No trace of fear. No trace of running. Just us,